Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of TFiR Let's Talk. And today we have with us once again Or Weis, CEO and co-founder of Permit.io. Or it's great to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We have covered you folks earlier, but it's always a good idea to refresh memories of our viewers. So talk a bit about what problem does Permit solve?
Sure. So, Permit and Gist is the offer for developers to never have to build permissions again. Myself, as a developer, I ended up rebuilding access control for my product in my previous company 5 times when the company wasn't even 3 years old. And that drove me insane as I thought that across my career, I literally built it thousands of times, and at no point did I want to. So with Permit, we're able to bake in permissions, RBAC, ABAC, and other capabilities into your product, so you can focus on actually building your product instead of these classic experiences of assigning roles to users, creating the policies, API key management, etc., etc.
Can you talk about when we do look at permissions or the problem that permit is solving? Are we looking purely at from the securities perspective? Because permissions can have different impact on a lot of different things. Just a few weeks ago, we also heard of an Uber hack. That is something we would should not expect in 2022, especially from a company of Uber size, which has a lot of sensitive data on us. It may be totally unrelated because the way hack was done, but the problem it brings forth is that there are still a big gaps there. So talk a bit about what role does permit play in the whole posture that a company may have when it comes to security permissions, authentications. I mean, there are a lot of things that are involved there.
Yeah, of course. So maybe I'll start off with just the basic metrics. OWASP recognizes broken access control as the A1 most critical issue when building applications today. It's the one with the most occurrences and the most severity when looking at building applications and products. So I think people are starting to realize that authorization or permissions, just like authentication and like cryptography before it, it's becoming best practice not to roll your own. It's something that is very easy to get wrong. It's something that is very easy to miss sensitive points around. And it's better to at least count on best practices, ideally open source products, and maybe best of all, services that are already made. So you won't have to make silly mistakes, both on the security side, which can translate into vulnerabilities, but also just plainly on the developer side. These are things that are constantly changing as our applications becoming more complex, as our customers require more interfaces with our product, so does our access control becomes more complex. And in the end of the day, it's not something that is unique to any product. And so as a developer, why waste time building this when you can focus on building your core capabilities? So this is both something that is dangerous to some degree to build on your own if you don't know what you're doing, and also kind of wasteful. You can better invest your resources elsewhere. And I think specifically now with what we're coming up with in Pyramid with our new ABAC release, low-code ABAC support, this enables developers to bake in complex policies, as complex as they want, without having to go deep into the reads, without having to waste a lot of time writing more code. And again, being able to focus on their products, while even better yet, delegating this problem to other people in the organization, the product managers, the security people. Once you have those low code interfaces, everyone can chime in the conversation, and the developer doesn't have to be a bottleneck anymore.
When you look at these kind of things happening, what is your feeling that, hey, we have been doing so much work in this space, this is something that should not happen? So our of course there is no dearth of technical solutions there. It was more of social engineering, and some clever hacker got access to that, which brings us to the point of cultural aspect of security. So when we look at just permit, you folks offer solutions which, as you said, make it easier, but how much cultural change you feel is needed, or it's already there?
I think one of the biggest things that we need to understand as people building software is that this is constantly covering more and more areas. More and more people are becoming developers if they're aware of it or not. Some of us are classic engineers writing code, and some of us are writing configuration and scripts, and some of us are using low code, no code interfaces. And also, we're starting to see people managing complex systems through interactions with AI. And this is just going to get more complex. The arrow of progress is pretty clear. So more and more people are going to be working on software in more and more complex scenarios. So as this space expands, so does the attack surface itself. So the question comes to prioritizing and deciding how you're tackling the problem. If we expect everyone to tackle all of the security problems all of the time, we're going to have a very bad time. But if we can have core engineers build the guardrails, build the infrastructure, and use best practices like policy as code, event-driven authorization layers, providing interfaces to the rest of the organization, and then allowing those people to chime in through those more guarded, more safe interfaces, things can actually expand and work. So this is really about recognizing the ongoing complexity, recognizing that even if you're building a simple application now, it's going to become more complex later, both in how you build it and in its requirements, and understanding that a lot of people need to chime in. So we need to provide the right interfaces for them.
Right. One more thing is that, low code, no code. Since you kind of, approach with low code, and once again, it's to lower the barrier of entry to make things easier for developers. But we also live in a field where we we kind of assume that, remember we used to say that, hey, you know what, today every company has to be a software company. If you're not a software company, you cannot survive. As much as that is true, the fact is there is a big gap in supply and demand of tech folks, especially when you look at latest cloud technologies. So there has to be a balance there which need to be maintained. But talk a bit about when we do look at low code, no code approach, how it simplifies things and let businesses focus on their areas of expertise versus having to find resources, software which is not their kind of focus.
Yeah, I think more and more core infrastructure components, things that are commonplace in applications, are going through that shift. Anything that is not proprietary is becoming enabled by additional services. This allows you as a specific developer or as a vendor to specialize in your own specific area. So this is just something that is happening in general. I think that as we go about that specialization, the question is, how do you balance that out with your other requirements? How do you balance it out with your existing infrastructure and the existing things that you're building? So for example there, so what we're trying to do with Permit and with our ABAC support is we allow you to use those low-code interfaces to generate very complex things without having to fully go down into the weeds. But we give you the option of going down into the weeds. Essentially, the policy editor that generates RBAC and ABAC code for you generates real code that gets pushed into a Git repository, which you can code review, which you can manage, which you can connect to the people that specialize in your organization in security, in compliance, in writing complex authorization code. So that allows you to find, for the different people in your organization, the sweet spot on the spectrum. So you can have a lot of people using the low-code interfaces on the top, and the more people you bring in and the more complex things you do, you can constantly build more layers and enable more interfaces for more people. But those always get translated down into code that you can manage and have the people specialized specifically in that come into play there. So it's really about finding the right balance point in time for the skill sets that you have in your organization, and knowing that you'll be future-proof. As your challenges for compliance become more complex, you can bring in more compliance people, and they'll have a spot, they'll have a code-based interface that they can connect to. As you want to cater to more customers and more scenarios, for example, you want policies like only users that have paid for a feature can use it, so something that relies on billing, or things that rely on quotas, or on geolocation, or on any other unique attribute that you have in your application, you'll be able to enable your product managers, your less advanced developers, your analysts, your support people, your professional sales to manage and build those without having every little thing be managed by those more advanced developers. So in bottom line, you can find balance between working directly on the code and working with low code. And I really think that bridging those is the most important thing we can do for both the stability and the extended growth of our software.
Excellent. Thank you. We do talk to each other on kind of on a regular basis, but it's always good to see, the updates, what's new happening at the company. You folks recently announced, ABAC, or attribute-based access control. Talk a bit about what it is, and once again, how does it help developers?
So we started with RBAC, role-based access control. RBAC is kind of the bread and butter of the authorization space. Everyone has heard of it. Not necessarily everyone understands it, but everyone has heard of it. And more often than not, companies end up building it because they have customers seeing it in other products and coming in and saying, hey, I need RBAC because that's what I'm used to. The idea with RBAC is that you manage all permissions directly through roles. If you get a permission to do something, it's because a role was assigned to you. An administrator role, an editor role, a auditor role. It can be also very specific roles for specific applications. And you can manage multiple tenants with multiple roles where each user has different roles with different tenants. So roles are really nice there because they're an easy way to think about the problem. But not every scenario can be described by roles. This is where attribute-based access control comes in, with the ability to create conditions on the different attributes that you have. So for example, and I already kind of mentioned a few of those. So for example, a policy like only users that have paid for a feature can use it. So you can potentially have a paying user role, but that already starts to get confusing. What about quotas? Only a user that hasn't used this quota within a specific period of time can continue to use this feature. So now you'll have a different role for every level of the quota. That doesn't make any sense. What about geolocation? What about time? Only users within these working hours can use this. Only users that belong to a specific department. Only users that own this specific file can access this. These are just common examples, and they're becoming more and more commonplace. With most products today, billing and quotas are kind of your run-of-the-mill. And these are things that you can't cover with role-based access control. So this is where ABAC comes in. And with our low-code support for ABAC, we're enabling you to use these complex policies without having to write complex code. Even before with Permit, you could write regular code on your own to implement these kind of policies. The difference is now is that you don't have to write that code. You can use a simplified interface that generates that code for you and breaks down the problem into what we call user sets and resource sets that you can think about it as if you're working with roles, but it covers all those scenarios that aren't accessible by roles. So that's what we're bringing to the table with low-code ABAC support. And I'm really super excited about this because this literally means that with an interface that every layman, every person that can work with a simple UI, you can generate any policy that you want. And so you can, without effort, make sure that this works with your product. And still, like before, have everything generated into code that you can manage in your Git repository. So you get that balance I mentioned before.
Talk a bit about the role of open source, importance of open source, not just for Permit, but this whole ecosystem.
Sure. So I think the permission space or authorization space is still rather nascent. Up till now, people were used to having authentication solutions, but authorization was still something that you'd brewed on your own. Authentication, as it grew, created standards for us. So it's really commonplace for you to use JSON Web Tokens today, for example, to manage your sessions and to manage your identities across your microservices and applications. But we still don't really have those standards for authorization. Which code language should I use? Which code agent should I use? How should I map my data? How should I load my data and keep it in sync with the different services and authorization components that I have? These are still challenges that the market needs to answer. I am a firm believer that standards, and the best standards are de facto standards, are very important. And the way to reach those standards is to provide something that is available for everyone to contribute to try and use, and build a conversation and a community around. So we're really adamant, we're really passionate about both adopting open source and combining it into what we're building, and also creating open source. We created an open source project called Opal, which is we call it the Open Policy Administration Layer. It works with OPA, but can also work with other agents, and it's a built-in way to manage in a distributed fashion many OPA agents and load into them all the data and policies that you need in real time in an event-driven fashion. So thanks to the standard that we are trying to build, we can have this conversation with our community and get this to the right place that it needs to be. So across software, we can have standards that everyone can connect with, even if they're not using our product specifically. And as we're trying to connect more and more solutions together, this is going to be super critical. And this is why we're passionate about it and invest a lot in it.
Of course, KubeCon is around the corner, almost here. Tell us a bit about what kind of presence Permit will have there, what folks can expect, from your presence, and what are you trying to explore at this KubeCon?
Yeah, so we're really excited for KubeCon. A significant percentage of our team is going to be there. We have our own booth, and we're really excited about engaging with other people there, just talking about the problem space, talking about technology. We'll be also giving some talks in some of the satellite events around KubeCon, SecurityCon specifically. My co-founder Asaf will be speaking there. I highly recommend this talk. And we really think that Cloud Native Con, KubeCon, this entire space is very exciting because we are seeing a lot of companies, a lot of our customers engaging us are coming to this problem because of the complexity of working both in microservices and in the Kubernetes space. A lot of people started with monolith applications and they built some classic old school authorization systems based on their framework. Like you have some access control in Django, in Python, some in Spring Framework in Java, obviously Ruby on Rails with Ruby. And all those solutions were great for a while, but they are just obsolete when you're moving to microservices. So a lot of them are approaching us at that point saying, hey, we're moving to microservices. We need a better solution that can work with this new kind of problem where you don't have one big area that you're protecting, but you need to scatter a little bit of access control across your entire system. So that's very relevant there when you're building cloud native applications. You almost have to build a cloud native authorization solution. It's almost unavoidable. And the second part is that access control is needed on multiple levels. It's kind of like the weakest link. You need access control on the physical level, you need it in the network level, infrastructure level, and the application level. So with infrastructure, a lot of the challenges are around managing access control in Kubernetes, doing admission control, doing service-to-service authorization. That's where our open source project Opal really shines in. OPA is a great solution to do access control in Kubernetes with Gatekeeper and Conftest and other outlets like that. But if you're managing multiple agents, you really don't have a good solution to use to just manage them and keep them up to date. So you can use Opal there both for the infrastructure level and the application level. That kind of creates a unified standard way to manage access control, manage your authorization layer across the stack. And that's something that I think KubeCon and Cloud Native Con is the best place to kind of talk about that kind of thinking of those standards.
Or once again, thank you so much for sitting down with me and of course talk about updates at Permit and also the larger problem that you folks are solving. And once again, I will look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.